The other day, we were talking about Churches of Christ and our reaction to the pictures like this of the wise men. And I'm not going to ask you out loud, because then y'all get pride in your I won that test sort of a deal. But you look at that. How many wise men are in that picture? Oh no, is that what I just heard? Did I hear somebody say, oh no? Yeah, because what's going to happen? There are 3. No, there were not. That's what somebody's going to say. There are others who will be upset if I say, they came after Jesus was born. They came. I'm actually quoting the gospel, by the way, when I say that. But, when you say they came right after the birth, well, people go, no, it was not. It was not. It was not right after the birth. You know better than that. That's what the Baptists think, and they're wrong. Again. No, I'm kidding. But that's what happens. That's just like this weird prideful thing we do, and it is prideful a little bit. I get that the principle of accuracy is a strength, but, we also get some pride in there. And we start talking about, we don't know when that was. And some people won't even talk about the birth of Jesus, because even though it's in the Bible, they're afraid that they might settle on a date and then be in trouble. You know what I mean? That sort of a deal. And so then we go into a chart of why we think it might have been September and yada, yada, yada. And then next thing you know, we're at the wise men. There couldn't have been 3 of them, but there might have been 3 of them. But we don't know that there are 3 of them, so don't say there are 3 of them. That's not right. Okay? So in some of the pictures you'll see, I will crop one of them out just so that you get your way. Okay? I promise. I really did, and I did it for that reason. But all of those things are not even the important part of the story, are they? There are important parts to this story, but so often we focus on the trivial matters of what really is an important story. That these men traveled from the east. We'll get into what that means a little bit. That they traveled from the east because of things they had heard that God was doing in the world, that God had promised His people, and that they believed, even though they were not Israelites, that they believed that as God worked through the people of Israel, that He was bringing a king. That He was bringing a king that would have a reign across the nations. And so when God revealed to them that it was time, they got up and they went. Again, not Israelites. People from a completely foreign culture or cultures, because they believed what God was showing them and what God had been showing them through the influence, we would presume, of other godly men who believed, which we'll get into here in just a second. It's kind of fascinating, this journey of the Magi, because there is a bit of mystery. We have no names. You may have grown up in a tradition that named these people some names, but they are never named in Scripture. They are never numbered in Scripture. The 3 is logical. 3 is logical because there were 3 gifts, probably 1 from each guy, but we don't know that. Some people call them kings, and there's really not any evidence that they were kings, but they were wise men. And not wise men like, I got a friend down at the gas station I see every now and then who seems really smart about which fuel to use, like truly wise and recognized as such men. If you think about the fact that these men traveled hundreds and hundreds of miles, spent days, weeks, who knows, maybe months, to come and see Jesus, it raises some questions. How did they know? Why did they care? I've kind of gotten into that a little bit. They cared because they had been told, both by truths passed on to them, and then by some sort of revelation from God. We know that because they knew they were supposed to follow the star. They clearly are getting some sort of signal, communication, vision, whatever. We don't have the specifics, but they're getting some sort of communication from God. It's not their culture. It's not their place. It's not their religion, as far as we know. And yet, they were told, they listened, they believed, and they sought after Him. Here's a question for you. Do you believe that God is still working, period? Do you believe God is still working in the hearts of people like them? In a foreign place, in a foreign culture, foreign to Christianity, not to Americans, foreign to faith, foreign to the Word of God, but who have bits and pieces, seeds that have been sown by wise and faithful people over time. And that could be neighbors, grandparents, just things that they've read and come across. Do you believe God is still working on the hearts of people like that in our world today? I think most of us do. We've been here for those reports from EEM of people who have, for example, landed in Greece as new immigrants to Greece, refugees from places like Syria, in the neighborhood of the wise men, places like that show up and talk about, listen, I don't know why, but God has been giving me these dreams and telling me I need to seek out these people of the Word, the people of the book, talking about Christians. And they get there, and the first thing that they want is a Bible and someone to help them to understand, like the Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, someone to help them understand what they're reading. And those people are coming, and as we've heard in now multiple reports over years, they are coming to Christ. We believe that's happening in places like Athens, and we believe that's happening in places like Israel. Do you believe that's happening in places like Texas, Arizona, California? Might those people be coming from? They could be coming from California. You could get a new California neighbor that you're going to complain about down at the Dairy Queen. What if you greeted them like a wise man and helped them find Jesus instead? Do you believe God is working on people like that? What if He has brought someone into your neighborhood or your county road or your workplace recently for just such a time as that? You might not want to talk about it. If it's at work, you might be discouraged from talking about it. Years ago, when we worked in Bonham up in northeast Texas, it was becoming a bedroom community. They were trying to resist that, but it was irresistible, and now they're even more so. And people were driving into Dallas all the time for work. A few of my friends worked for a corporation. I'll tell you the name in a minute, but they worked for a corporation downtown Dallas that had policies about communication, about faith in the workplace. And they were all prohibitive. And so you weren't supposed to invite people to church. You weren't supposed to ask them if they wanted to study the Bible. You weren't supposed to talk about Jesus at the water cooler or the coffee pot or any of that stuff. And I remember when they implemented, this is back probably around 99, 2000, 2001, somewhere in there, right in that window. So a long time ago, y'all probably didn't even know we had email back then, but we did. We even had filters and all kinds of stuff. You know, it was amazing. But we did still... In my office, it was still a dial-up phone. It was old for then. It was crazy. But they had implemented new filters at this corporation that would catch words like God, church, Bible, faith, believe, and delete the emails. And so this worker was telling me, white-collar worker in an office, was telling me about how, he's no longer able. They had been having some conversations at work, and they were doing it through email because they couldn't talk about it at the coffee pot. They couldn't talk about it at their cubicle. They couldn't talk about it out in the open, so they'd switch to email. And somebody, you know how it is, somebody found out they were talking talk they weren't supposed to be talking in the talkie place on the email. And so they put in a new filter, and it just starts deleting emails. And they just noticed their stuff was going away, and then an announcement was made, and da-da-da-da. And some of you may have been through that. Some of you are young enough, you've only ever worked in places that had things like that. You didn't know that at one time you were able to have a normal free conversation in a free country at a free place like that, right? Now, I told you that it was an office in downtown Dallas, and that may surprise you that 25 years ago or so, that was already happening right here in Texas in the Bible Belt, but it probably shouldn't. It might surprise you more that it was not some corporation based out of some other place where you go, yeah, that was one of them godless New Yorkers. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It was TXU. Hey, I just called y'all out right there on the internet. It was TXU that did that 25 years ago. Not allowed. Not allowed for two brothers or sisters to talk about their own faith, even in the privacy of an email going through their system. Couldn't do it. And I get, professionalism and, talking about different things on the company's time. And all that I understand. And so they have an authority there. They have a right. They have a this. They have a that. And you can see where things can sometimes get abused. But there are lots of barriers because Jesus is very disruptive. Jesus does get in the way of a lot of things, and he changes a lot of things, and sometimes people are afraid of the impact of even a conversation in an email. The wise men, let's talk about them, and then let me tell you somebody that got a little bit upset about the existence of Jesus. If you're using the YouVersion in that outline, you'll actually can go to this full article later and check this out. I would encourage you to. That's a good article, but it was really long, and I don't want to read you all that. But I do want to share with you this little bit of information because there's a cool gem in here that maybe you haven't thought of. Maybe you have. We're talking about the wise men. This is from John MacArthur, and it's an article about who they were and where they came from and all of that. In the middle of it, he says, we learn from the book of Daniel that the Magi, not these guys, but the Magi, period, like who they're from and what they were. There was a long line of Magi. That the Magi were among the highest-ranking officials in Babylon. Because the Lord gave Daniel the interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which none of the other court seems was able to do, Daniel was appointed as ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over the wise men, the Magi of Babylon. You know what that means, right? That means while Daniel is the ruler over the wise men of Babylon, he also has the authority to decide his curriculum, to decide what he will teach them, what he will share with them, and can do that, at least to some degree. We know what happens with Daniel for a while, with a degree of his own decision-making and his own wisdom from God about how that can be shared. That's important because that means he gets to plant seeds, okay? He gets to plant seeds. God had providentially put him there to do that. So that was Daniel 2, verse 48. Because of his great wisdom and because he had successfully pleaded for the lives of the wise men who had failed to interpret the king's dream, Daniel 2:24, Daniel came to be highly regarded among the Magi. The plot against Daniel, which caused him to be thrown into the lion's den, was fomented by the jealous satraps and the other commissioners. And if you go and you read that story, this is in Daniel 6, 4-9. One of the things that you notice, and maybe when you're doing your daily Bible reading, you skip a little bit of this because it's repetitive. He says, and then all of the da-da-da-da-da-da-da, including the satraps and the this and the that and the governors and the blah, 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 blah. And he lists all these government officials, and he lists them over and over again, multiple times. The writer of this, John MacArthur, I think he was very keen to catch this. In that list, other times, the Magi or the wise men, they're listed. But when it comes time after Daniel has been in this position, and people are plotting a way for him to be pushed out of the place, they're missing from the list. They did not participate. That's interesting. Just chew on that one for a second. So, the plot against Daniel that caused him to be thrown into the lion's den was fomented by jealous satraps and other commissioners, but not the Magi. And because of Daniel's high position and great respect among them, it seems certain that the Magi learned from that prophet about the one true God, the God of Israel, and about his will and plans for his people through the glorious coming king. Because many Jews remained in Babylon after the exile and intermarried with the people of the East, it is also likely that the Jewish messianic influence remained strong in that region, even until New Testament times. And it's not just empty speculation. There's history to back up what he's saying. So, seeds from the time of Daniel may, I'm going to say may because it's not like we know this for certain, but may and very likely did influence the wise men of the East. And the East here, sometimes you'll see people talk about that like we're talking like they came from Japan or Beijing. No, the East in their vernacular was generally Persia and Babylon. Iranians and Iraqis is what we would call those people now. Persians, that's the land of the Iranians in today's political map. So, exactly where Daniel was. Under the influence of things he would have taught that still would have been in the philosophical bloodstream of the wise men of Babylon. And they remembered, he's making the argument, they remembered who they were looking for. And we know Daniel talked about those things because when Jesus shows up, there were also faithful Jews also looking for a Messiah according to the details and a kingdom according to the details that Daniel had taught. So if you've ever wondered, how would they even have known? They knew because a faithful man used his place and used his platform to sow the seeds of the kingdom of the Messiah. And centuries later, they bore fruit. What you do this week, what you do today to sow the seeds of the kingdom can bear fruit for centuries. Ask Daniel. Ask the wise men. So don't ever lose sight of that. That's one thing. When Jesus comes and disrupts, this is its ultimate purpose. It is so that lives and eternities will be changed. It is so that truth will be planted as seed in the hearts of men to bear fruit generation after generation after generation. And in the case of the wise men, that is what happened. My thumb just completely went dead, didn't it? There you go. That's fine. There you go. We'll move ahead. Then there's another guy. You got Herod. Let's read this. Matthew chapter 2. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Now listen, why would that be? Why would he be troubled? Herod is supposed to be a Jew. He's supposed to be a believer. He's supposed to be looking for the Messiah. But here's the problem. These men are saying that on this Herod's watch, the Messiah who will become the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the one whose kingdom shall never end, has shown up. If you are somebody who is a big fish in a small pond and a bigger fish shows up, what does that do to your ego? What does that do in terms of fear and insecurity? What does that do in terms of envy, jealousy? That's Herod. That's Herod. If everything you are is wrapped up in power and in possessions and in prominence, then a king like Jesus just messes all of that up. Because humility and power seldom go together. Because serving another king is not what a Herod looks for. And that happens in worldly kingdoms. It happens in households. It happens in churches. It happens in workplaces. People want to hold on to the power they've got. I think it's funny when in churches, when people seek power, because it shows that you completely lost the plot of the whole deal. There's only one in power here, and his name is Jesus. Only one. All the rest of us are, Jesus said, but unworthy servants. That's it. No one ever becomes a Herod wanting to be an unworthy servant. And sometimes we think we're Herods. And Jesus is disruptive. And man, does he then get under people's skin. Look at verses 3 and 4. When Herod heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he assembled people who also had their own little bits of power that they would want to hold on to and then would help him hold on to his. He calls together chief priests, scribes, and people and inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And they said, Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. Isn't it funny that at this point they seem to get it? They seem to understand where Jesus was supposed to be coming from. But then when he actually starts stepping into their realm of influence, they start rejecting him. Jesus will mess your life up, won't he? Especially if you're trying to hold on to the wrong things. Verse 6, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. And then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. Lie. They were on to him. They seemed to catch on pretty quick. Maybe God even gave them some conviction on this. But they pick up on what Herod is doing. That he wants to know where he is. And I wonder why. Let's jump down to verse 13. Well, no, let's go to 11. Going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. I want you to think about this for a second. His ego was so bad. His lust for power was so bad. His insecurity and envy was so bad that he's afraid of a toddler. This is a man who is king over Judea, and he's afraid of a toddler. You say, yeah, but he was Jesus. I get it, but it's not like he's said anything yet that should worry Herod, done anything yet that should worry Herod. It's not like there's anything he's doing that is an issue. So why is he an issue? He would be an issue if you actually have some level of at least intellectual belief that God might really have chosen him, that the people might actually believe in him, and that he might actually be king one day, and therefore disrupt your way of life. That would become a problem, right, if you're Herod? He feels threatened by a toddler. The presence of Jesus, just his presence, is so disruptive that at a couple of years old, people were already shaking in their boots that he was going to make big changes. Now, if that's true, is it any wonder that when we read the Scriptures at times, we look at what Jesus wants us to do and wants us to become and how he wants us to grow and how he wants us to change, and we start putting up walls of defense. Even though we say we're Christians, we put up walls of defense against what God needs us to do or to become or to give up or to change. There's no wonder, because if just his presence is that disruptive, what if he starts talking? And he talks. You open up that Bible and he talks. And you close it and it doesn't even stop. He will still be disruptive because he'll just sit. You close your Bible and he'll just send somebody else who hasn't closed theirs. And they'll say something, or sometimes just do something not even knowing what's going on. And God will use them to threaten your way of life once more. As sinners, the truth is we need our way of life threatened, don't we? We get into ruts of indifference we get into ruts of blindness to what spiritually is going on around us. We get into ruts of, good night, billions of people dying without Jesus. And if we've never lost sleep over that, God help us, what's wrong with us? He's disruptive. He'll disrupt your sleep. We've all been there and done that, right? Sometimes we just want to sleep at night, and the Spirit won't leave us alone. Herod knows. He's a heathen, but he knows. So why we sometimes act like we don't, I do not know. Let's look at Matthew 2, verses 10 to 12. I've highlighted a few things there. Go back to the wise men for a second. Look at their reactions again. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary and his mother. And what'd they do? They fell down and they worshiped. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed and went to their own country. They obeyed. They worshiped. They honored. And they obeyed. These foreigners, people from a country that a lot of Jews didn't even like at the time, believers didn't like at the time, because they'd been captives there. You got hard feelings for a long time after that, right? But they believed. They worshiped. They honored. And they obeyed. They protected the child through their actions. That's the reaction a believer has. To worship, to honor, to obey. Herod's reaction was to lash out in anger, to self-protect, not in a healthy way, but in an egotistical and angry, vengeful way. He ends up having the boys under 2-year-old, Jewish boys under 2 years old, murdered. How selfish can humans be? It's one of those things where you look at that and you don't want to think that anybody else would ever do that. That's just his problem. But it's not just his problem. I mentioned our indifference sometimes to reaching out to people with the gospel. How many people have died without Christ more? Those who were slain by Herod, or those who were walked past by the church? You don't want Jesus to ask you that question, do you? Is that disruptive? It is to me. It is to me. It's disruptive. We can get defensive. We can look for excuses. But then we only walk in the steps of Herod instead of the steps of Jesus. Those who were wise stood in wonder, worshiped, honored, and then obeyed and went where he led them. There were 2 or 3 other people in this story, besides Jesus, of course, and that's Joseph and Mary. It was rather disruptive to their life, too. They end up having a child they're having to protect. And thankfully, the Lord is helping them to do that job. Their response so far has been one of incredible faithfulness, of deep belief and obedience, doing really awkward and hard things in order to have this child and raise this child who is going to be and is the Messiah. Now they're told, your life is in danger. You need to get up and go. Well, that's scary enough. That's disruptive. It's all just because of the presence of the child again. But they go. And where do they go? The angel says, I need you to go to Egypt. Where's the last place they're wanting to go, I would imagine? If they're like anybody else in their neighborhood, they're like, Egypt? Do you know the last time that the Jews went to Egypt, what happened there? I mean, these are both people from the line of the family that ended up there. They got family history from Joseph on in Egypt, and they're sitting there going, no, you would think, but they don't do that. They don't say no, like we might. Like we might. Instead, they get up and they faithfully go and protect that child that is their stewardship because they believe. And what does God do? Every time God calls you into something that seems crazy like that, what does God do? He goes with you. He guides you. He protects you. He delivers you. And He makes sure that what was supposed to happen is going to happen. Do you trust Him for that? Belief and faith and trust aren't belief and faith and trust that God is going to come in and protect our lifestyle. Belief, faith, and trust is that Jesus, you can change and disrupt anything that in your wisdom you see fit to change and disrupt. Because this life is yours. That's a faithful response. And Mary and Joseph, they live that every time we see them here, don't they? Every time. Because they believe in the one who is present with them. You see it in the wise men because they believed in the one who was present in that day. Herod, man, don't be a Herod. It's not worth it, is it? Just don't be a Herod. Look at your own reactions to Jesus when He tries to get you to do different things. Which one of these are you? Which one do you want to be? Which one do you think honors God the most? And then remember that last line there. Nobody was ever the same. And, let me add a line, nobody ever got to stay the same regardless of which choice they made. He's going to disrupt. By faith, you get to choose which disruption and which change will it be.